All right, this week on Secure Digital Life, the only place you can learn about cybersecurity at 20 below zero while you're skiing. Actually, that's not true. This week on SDL, while I'm skiing, Russ is going to talk about his favorite acronyms because he didn't do that last week. So unfortunately for you, you don't get to learn about it while you're skiing at Vale. So enjoy SDL, stick around.
This is a Security Weekly production.
Welcome to Secure Digital Life. If your users are going to keep putting risky stuff on your machine, you're screwed. So Top can help us understand the complexity of blockchain.
I was reading through the show notes, man, and oof.
In binary, it would be 001. Who cares? But it's probably not significant anyway. Be like you're looking out through the HAL dot, you know, like, oh, hey Dave, Dave.
It's like Sims, but with, you know,
it would be like Sims
instead of AI. It's only.
Accredited by Microsoft, Cisco, NetApp, IDLE, Oracle, and EC Council, QuickStart delivers high-impact, low-cost IT training through its cognitive learning platform in multiple domains. With QuickStart, you get an ever-growing catalog of courses, self-paced courses offered through a monthly subscription, virtual classrooms offered through an annual subscription, peer-to-peer learning, mentoring, official courses, certified instructors, hands-on labs, and more. For more information, visit www.quickstart.com. Use coupon code PAUL20 to get 20% off on all cybersecurity courses. QuickStart, creating world-class technologists.
Hello, everyone. It's just me today. Secure World Boston is hosting their 15th annual conference, March 27th to the 28th, at the Heinz Convention Center. Security Weekly listeners save $100 off a full conference pass by visiting secureworldexpo.com and using the code SecurityWeekly. RSA Conference 2019 is the place to be from March 4th, my birthday, to the 8th. San Francisco, here we come. They'll come alive with cybersecurity's brightest minds as they gather together to discuss the industry's newest developments. Go to rsaconference.com/securityweekly-US19 to register now. Using the discount code, and I'm going to mimic Doug here, 5 Uniform 9 Sierra Whiskey Foxtrot Delta? Sure. I was going to say something else. To receive $100 off a full conference pass. Security Weekly will be in Broadcast Alley on Monday and Tuesday of RSA Conference 2019, recording sponsored interviews and hosting briefings. To learn more or request time with us, please visit securityweekly.com/conference request. And here we are, episode, it's not 100, it's 99.5 because it's part 2 of what we were doing last week. And plus, we wanted to save episode 100 for a little special. It's a big thing for us, so we wanted to save that for when Doug and I are both here in the studio next week. So what we're doing is I am picking up where Doug left off. He went through a list of his favorite acronyms related to technology and computing in some way. So I'm going to list a few for you today and go through some descriptions and possibly a story. But let's begin. So one of my first favorite, I thought, was DHCP. And DHCP, as most of you already know, stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. And DHCP runs on most modern-day networks from home. Well, it runs on all of them, right? Well, to an extent. You can have 2 types of IP assignments. We'll get to IP in a minute. But when you go on the internet or you're connecting to a network, you need what's called an IP address. And an IP address can be assigned in one of 2 ways, statically or dynamically. A static assignment is where an individual, a network admin, a network a network person usually, walks around to the devices and manually configures the IP address. So they'll set the IP address, they'll set the gateway, they'll set the DNS settings and the subnet mask. So that's a static assignment. Now, in a home, that might be okay. So in a home, you have maybe maybe 2 or 3 machines. And if you wanted to create your own network, you know, and I encourage that to my students, give them as a weekend project. Go home, you know, shut down your DHCP services on your router and create your own and create your own network, or try to, for internal use only. And so you can walk around and change the settings, the IP settings on your machines, which isn't so bad if it's only 3. But if you're working at Microsoft, or you're working at, you know, Dell, SecureWorks, or anywhere else that has more than 3 computers, or I should say hosts, because they don't have to be just computers, anywhere more than 3 hosts, then you probably don't want to administer that. That would be an administrative nightmare. You know, you're talking about literally hundreds of thousands of hosts. So you have a DHCP server, and the DHCP server is the other part of IP assignment, and it uses a server or service to dynamically assign an IP. So it keeps a log or a database of all the IP addresses that are out on the network at that time. And when a computer or a host turns on, it calls out to the DHCP server, and, you know, ringing the doorbell. And the DHCP server responds, acknowledges the request, sends back, making sure that the security policies allow that host to procure an IP address, and then the DHCP assigns the IP address, puts it in the log, and says, all right, let's check. So the good thing about DHCP and why I like it so much is because we don't have to manually administer networks, you know, and we can, and some people still do, but we don't have to. It breaks the internet down and networks down into manageable, you know, and partitionable sizes. So, you know, it helps us when we're dealing with creating complex networks. Next up, similarly related to the internet and services required, DNS. Okay, a DNS is a server or service, so DNS stands for Domain Name System. Okay, and a domain name system, all right, a DNS server, is sort of like the phone book of the internet. And it's funny because when I use that sample or example in class to my students, they're like, phone book, you know, go figure. And I remember growing up with yellow pages, white pages. And I seem to remember even I think it was blue pages, but the blue pages were like the subset in the back, if I remember correctly. I don't know if they were even called that, but I remember them being a pale, ugly blue color. And those were, if I also remember correctly, those were maybe more businessy or B2B stuff. I don't. But anyway, so the white and the yellow pages were a thing. And the white pages, as you know, or may not know, depending on mostly age or exposure, the white pages were by name. Okay, so if you knew somebody's last name, Smith, you could open up the white pages. The books were usually like that thick, depending on where you live. You'd open up the white pages and you'd look for S for Smith, and then you'd get a bunch of phone numbers for people whose last names were Smith. And as you can imagine, there were quite a few for that particular last name. So you'd have to know their address, and it also listed their mailing address, unless you had a do not list or whatever, and you had to pay for that. So, but anyway, that's how the white pages work. And the yellow pages were by business. So if you wanted, you know, an exterminator, you'd look up E for exterminator, and then under exterminator, it would list all the businesses, and of course, that's where they made a lot of some of their money, or at least enough to produce those booklets. Is with the businesses, because the businesses could take out as big of an ad in the page as possible, based on what they could afford. But anyway, those two methods were the tools of the time to look up addresses, names, and phone numbers of businesses or people. In the internet, it works similarly, but using DNS. And DNS, as you know, the internet doesn't understand, or computers don't understand alone, what an address is. So if you open your web browser and there's no DNS setting, or the LMS file is not configured appropriately, you would type in, you know, ebay.com. Even though you're potentially connected to a network, you won't go anywhere, because the computer doesn't understand what ebay.com is. Just like, you know, an individual didn't understand what John Smith was without a phone number. So similarly, a DNS server or services provide a host name to IP address resolution and lookup. So if a user does type in eBay.com and they are connected to a DNS server, then the DNS server can say, hey, look, this is the IP address. Let's send you there because that's where the server is. That's what I have in my file. Now, DNS is very interesting. You may have heard in past shows us talking about different types of things, from spoofing to poisoning, and then, that type of thing where users can actually access DNS records either through local methods or through insecure server methods, and they can change data associated with it. So instead of your DNS server pointing to ebay.com is 68.15.5, it points ebay.com to some pornographic website or some other nefarious server, and the computer doesn't know any better. It just knows what's in its database. So DNS, domain name system, it's the phone book of the internet. IP. Oh, let me take a sip here. Oh, too much talking. IP as an IP address. IP stands for Internet Protocol, and the IP part of TCP/IP is really the address that your computer or host receives in order to get on the internet. It is a unique value, okay, on the network. So if you're on your home network, okay, say you have 5 machines, 5 hosts on your network: PlayStation, computer, laptop, tablet, and cell phone. Each of those 5 hosts have to have different IP addresses. You can't have the same network have the same IP address, otherwise you get what's called an IP address conflict. Just like on the Discover net, let's say, let me take Visa. Take a Visa card, right? And if 2 people in the Visa network have the same account number, well, that's bad, right? Because when person A goes to run their Visa card, right? How does Visa know that it was person A and not person B? Because they have the same account number. So similarly, an IP address, you need to have a unique identifier on the same network. Now, that's not to say that, and this is where people get confused, including me sometimes. My home network, right, could have 192.168.1.5. Someone else's home network could also have 192.168.1.5, right? But they're not on the same network. They're internal to that network. Using port forwarding and all those types of technologies, your router really kind of does that address resolution, and so that's why you can have 2 different networks that are obviously not on the same network. 2 different networks have the same IP address. So, and if we couldn't have that, then we would have run out of IP addresses a long time ago. All right, and then you have your public and your private and so on and so forth. So, but 2 public routable IP addresses can never be the same. They're always different on the same network. So, all right, next up, USB. All right, this was a big one. Universal Serial Bus. Now, many of you use USB as a connection point for many of your devices. I use my USB to sync my iPhone, or not to sync, actually, yeah, it is to sync. I was thinking of the old days with Palm Pilots. Oh, that's a date reference. Palm Pilots, where you'd have to sync over IR, which was, well, let's just say that was terrible. So USB would sync I can sync my iPhone. I can charge my iPhone because it carries voltage. I can also, connect a drive. I have a 256 gig drive, and I have it. I use it. I bring it with me. You can even install full operating systems on these devices. So, and USB does a heck of a lot more than just that. But USB has become the standard by which both PCs and Macs can connect to various pieces of technology. Now, USB is broken down into standards, okay, set by the IEEE, and we'll get to IEEE, I think, next. All right, so USB, the first one is full speed, or 1.x, and 1.x because it went from 1.0 to 1.1. And so full speed USB is the first gen, I'll call it first gen USB technology. And the USB technology for first gen ranged in data processing speeds from 1.5 to 12 megabits per second, which, sounds slow now, right? I mean, even for internet, I'm pulling 60 to 80 now on a residential connection. So, but yeah, so 1.5 to 12 megabits per second. The second gen standard was known as high-speed USB, and that was pulling 480 megabits per second, right? And then the newer ones, the third generation, are pulling 3.x super speed, they're known as, and they're pulling anywhere between 5 and 20 gigabits per second. So, those standards have evolved over time. Eventually, you'll see probably a 4th gen, a 5th gen, and so on and so forth. And if you remember the connectors for USB, the original ones, the A connectors were rectangular, I should say, and elongated, and they had 4 pins in them. And then that sort of changed over time. Now, if you look at the new the C-type connectors, there were USB A, USB B, right? USB B were the connectors for the old printers. They looked almost cuboidal, certainly square with a little sort of notch or rounded notches cut out at the top. And then USB-C now looks very different. It's sort of ovular, right? And so what's happened is the form of the cable, the connector, has shrunk down to accommodate modern technology, and so that the bus technology didn't have to sit as a host in a host that was a thick laptop. Now, because laptops are shrinking, I mean, look at the Surface, look at the MacBook Air, you need to have a much smaller connector. So that's part of also why these things are getting smaller. So getting smaller, getting faster, all that's good. And so the IEEE, as I mentioned a minute ago, is the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers. And in the show notes, I left a link that you should look at if you're interested in seeing what types of standards there are. For instance, IEEE, you've heard maybe of 1394, and IEEE 1394 is also known as the standard for FireWire. It's technically called the standard for a high-performance serial bus Amendment 3. Okay, well, I don't speak that language. I am not an engineer, but I do understand FireWire. So that's what that was. Another one was IEEE standard 1711.2, which is the draft standard for secure SCADA, more on that in a minute, communications protocol, or SSCP. And again, they're not just doing this for computers, they're doing this for anything relating to electronics and engineering. And then IEEE 1725 was the standard for rechargeable batteries for cellular telephones, right? So that's another type of standard. And literally, if you go to that link I put in the notes, there's thousands of pages of all of these standards. And if you've ever, I remember, in electrical engineering class, or it was electronics, I think it was called, it was part of physics. We had those IEEE books, and they were huge, and it had all that stuff in it. So this is searchable. It takes the place of that book, and it's widely available. So, SCADA. You've heard us talk about SCADA before. SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. These SCADA technologies are devices that are usually in industrial complexes. They are things like controllers. Think of, plants, manufacturing plants. Like I think of the big robots that assemble cars with, the arms, and you have all these interfaces and these controllers. And these controllers are these SCADA systems. Now, you've also heard us talk about a lot about securing SCADA technologies. And this has become a problem because these SCADA systems are often, I don't want to say all, but often not updated. There's people who operate them or utilize them don't know what the internal components are like. So if somebody can infiltrate or break into a SCADA system, there's a risk that, for instance, they could literally change the direction of the joystick, all right? And so instead of, moving the system up, the joystick would move the system down, and so on and so forth. I mean, that's a very rudimentary example, but you get the idea. And costing, lots of money associated with production errors, malfunctions, and even in some cases, safety issues related to both the workers or the products that are being delivered out to the consumers who are buying them. So SCADA is another one that I like. A huge favorite of mine, and you've heard me talk about this a lot, is IoT, and Doug talks about this a lot too. So IoT, Internet of Things, and it's sort of this encompassing term that covers anything connected, any smart device at home connected to the internet. So garage doors, light bulbs, refrigerators, toasters, microwaves, toothbrushes, marital aids, adult toys, which was funny. I woke up this morning and the first thing that I saw in one of my news feeds was, hackers claim that adult dolls can be hacked and told to kill people. I'm like, oh, geez. Okay, so anyway, that and a host of other devices, and I currently use. I'm a big proponent of Philips Hue. I enjoy that. I use that in my office a lot. I've got about 8 or 9 different bulbs, and I control it with my phone or through Amazon. So Echo, or Alexa, I should say, and also. At home, I have more of the Zwave Zigbee stuff because HomeKit for me isn't working, and I wanted to try a different IoT thing, so I'm using Zigbee and Z-Wave devices at home, and then as I said, HomeKit's another one through Apple. So IoT, it's one of my favorites, and all right, this is just fun to say, and I remember it was a big deal maybe 10 years ago when I was doing some rudimentary website design and coding. WYSIWYG, WYSIWYG, W-Y-S-I-W-I-G, WYSIWYG, and it stands for what you see is what you get. These types of interfaces or WYSIWYG editors were like, think of back to the day of like Microsoft Front Page or Coffee Cup HTML editor, or those types of things. And basically, what it was it would render a real-time representation of what the back end was that you were designing on a essentially it's a compiler, but a real-time compiler. So as you move text on the screen, you could see what it looked like on the actual web page. So WYSIWYG, I'm not sure that they're much around anymore. I mean, now we're on things like, Dreamweaver, or people are using CMS systems, content management systems, things like, Wix or Drupal is another one. Duda, that's another one. So those types of things. So, excuse me, people are moving more onto CMS systems now, which are not as WYSIWYG. They can be. But they're not as WYSIWYG as, say, something like Front Page was back in the day. So, but all great technologies, by the way. I enjoy. In fact, I'm building a website right now using Wix. So, very good. Codec. Now, codec's not so much an acronym as it's a composition of two words: code, decode. Okay, like. For instance, modem is another one of those words, right? Modem, did you know that modem is a combination of words? Modem stands for a combination of modulate and demodulate. So codec, all right, same thing, code, decode, is required. It's like not a driver, but it's a compiler of some sort, or a medium by which media files are encoded for streaming. So many of you back in the day, if you're as old as I am, or maybe even a little bit younger, you may have done CD ripping or ripped movies, for instance, and I'm not saying you should have done this, but and I didn't, but distribute them through an online service, peer-to-peer networking. And so what you would do is you would throw a DVD in the burner and you would hit rip, and what it would do, rip and burn. That's what it's called. And rip would take the media file, take the media file off, and it would encode it as whatever codec you had set or requested in the software. Like MPEG-4 is a big one still today. MOV, that's Mac or Apple's QuickTime. Then for audio it was MP3. and Microsoft specific with WMV, and so on and so forth. So basically what it was doing was it provided a method of taking raw data, right, the raw movie or the raw audio, and then compressing it so that it could be sent out through digital means, either streaming or distribution. So and another thing that codecs do is create smaller files. So a DVD, for instance, in raw format, a plain DVD, not HD or Blu-ray or whatever, a plain DVD holds about 4.7 gigs of data. And a movie, okay, a regular DVD movie that occupies that will take up roughly 3/4 or something like that, depending on the features and how much video and audio are on that DVD. So, whereas back in the day, you know, I keep saying that phrase, I hate it, whatever. You know, it used to be that when a DVD, because we didn't have high-speed internet like that back, you know, 10 years ago, well, maybe 15, what we had to do was compress it, and we would use VCDs. So we would compress it as MPEG-4 or WMV or VCD, and you would need a special player to play it, and you would send them out through whatever social, not social media, but you would use peer-to-peer. LimeWire is one of them, and things of that. So using that codec, we were able to encode those videos and audio files and send them out. And last, okay, let me take a sip for this one. This is the story. PBX, okay? And this, I don't even know if these systems are still used today. I mean, there's got to be more of, you know, more technology. But anyway, let's cut back to the year. The year is 2000 and, let's say 1999. All right, just because I got that song in my head, Prince. 1999, and a certain individual was working at probably, and when I say the best job, I mean the laziest job I've ever had, and that's what made it the best, because I could do whatever. I mean, that person could do whatever the heck he wanted. And it was at a gas station, and it was a gas station overnight, and I was going to school full time during the day at college, and then you know, to make some additional money, I wanted to work at someplace. I didn't want a high-pressure job because I wanted to focus on my studies and all that kind of stuff. So I got this job at a gas station. Now, the gas station's great because, or was great because, it was just a small box. And by the way, they're not around anymore. It was a small box, and nobody could come in or out, okay, except for the person that worked there. There was a toilet, right, and then there was a small, and I mean very small, enough for one person to stand in, sort of back entry where they had a desk and that kind of thing. And then the counter you would sit at had a register and 2 slide panels, and the slide panels was how you would communicate with the customer when they came in. Now, as you can imagine, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., there weren't a lot of customers that came to the kiosk, as it was called, it was basically a shoebox, to the kiosk. So, you know, I would occasionally get, maybe if I was lucky, anywhere from 4 to 6 customers a night, which they felt that what was I making? Maybe $8 an hour, $7 with the shift differential maybe. So $7 an hour, let's say, you know, justified me staying open for those, you know, 4 to 6 customers, whatever. Anyway, so a friend of mine who also worked there was a burgeoning hacker. And he's like, "Hey, Russ, I'm bored. Let's have some fun." Now, I wasn't into computer science as much as I am now. Back then, I was more into chemistry and hard science. So, I guess computer science could be, well, anyway, I was into more chemistry. So, fine. So he would come to the kiosk and hang out all night. He only lived down the road, so he would walk there. And he's like, let's try something. I'm like, all right, what's this hacking business you speak of? And we didn't have laptops. We couldn't even afford them they were anyway, they were huge bricks at that time in 1999. If you know, they were available to the public then. I don't even remember. But anyway, so we didn't have computers. So all we had was the telephone. We didn't even have cell phones at that time. Well, we didn't. So we had the landline, so we had some fun. Now, some of the first stores at the location that I was working were opening that were 24 hours. Okay, so I won't go into what stores those were. They don't want to know. And my friend, we'll call him Sven. Sven was able to, because of his knowledge, he was a very, 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 very smart person. And Sven wanted to start doing some social engineering. So what he would do is he would call these 24-hour stores, okay, one in particular, and he would try, and he knew that their communication systems were PBX. So PBX system, you know, think of all the telephones in a store. Think of like your grocery store here. And when you call in the grocery store and you say, and they ask you, hey, how can I help you? You say, I want to be transferred to the meat department. Well, they type in a little code on the phone, hang up the phone, and then your call gets transferred to the meat department, and so on and so forth. There's also an intercom. So his postulate was that he felt that the PBX systems were not secure and that he could gain access to the store's intercom from off-site. I said, that can't be possible. I mean, that would be a big problem. And because they're relying on the individual people that work there to not know, or to know not to transfer an individual to the intercom extension, right? Well, you would think. Anyway, so all we had to do, or mostly him, Sven, all we had to do was get somebody who was new, or didn't know nighttime stock, right? It's 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. But that particular store is open and doing business while stock people are coming and stocking. So we had somebody, he called up, and we got to somebody and like, yeah, and you asked for like the most innocuous department, like, oh yeah, kids' shoes. I mean, how much? You wouldn't ask for general merchandise or hardware, because there people might actually know what's going on in there. No, you ask for something innocuous, kids' shoes. Who's dealing in kids' shoes at 11 o'clock at night? Precisely. So, we had said, or he had said, hey, I'm James actually what he did was he found out who the manager was, because when he called, the manager's name is just listed right on the phone, right? It's an entry to the exchange. So it'd say, hi, manager, your manager is James, blah, blah. So we said, hi, this is James. We got the name of the person that they were transferred to in the shoe department from the guy who transferred us. And we said, hey, Joanne, this is James. I need I can't remember what the extension for the intercom is. I'm trying to transfer to announce something over the intercom. Could you remind me? I can't get in touch with anybody else. And, again, social engineering. Finally, we got the intercom number, and we said, hung up. Now, that was the first piece of the puzzle. The last piece of the puzzle, right, was getting somebody to transfer us to that number. So we called back, 10 minutes later, blah, blah, blah. It's like, and we asked for somebody else in some innocuous department. And the first couple of people said no, so we'd hang up, and we call back. And finally, we got some noob. And they said, sure, we'll transfer you. So they transferred us, and for 10 minutes, we had, well, it was more like 8, but for 8 minutes, we had control over this particular 24/7 store's PBX system. And, we weren't doing anything really bad. We were just like, everything in aisle 4 is free for the next 10 minutes, and blah, 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 and stuff like that. So it's kind of funny. But anyway, long story long, the PBX systems enabled us to do that. That's why PBX has a special place in my heart of hearts for acronyms. And yeah, so that's pretty much it for my list. And so next week, episode 100. Whoa, I can't believe it's 100. And Doug and I will be here to see you together. Take care.